The Cleitophon is an odd and perplexing little dialogue. Socrates isn't its protagonist, but its defendant, and he is accused not merely of having some mistaken ideas, but of positively being a hindrance to the pursuit of virtue. This, of course, would be the most serious sort of charge to bring against Socrates, since he claims repeatedly to be acting so as to improve the souls of those around him. And after Clitophon delivers his accusation against Socrates, the dialogue abruptly ends with Clitophon's charges remaining unanswered. In ancient times, as far as we can tell, the Clitophon was always counted as one of Plato's dialogues. But in modern times, its authenticity has often been doubted. The main reason for this doubt is that many scholars couldn't believe that Plato would level these sorts of unanswered accusations against his beloved teacher Socrates. The arguments in the Clitophon are fairly clear, so grinding through each of its parts in detail would waste your time. Clitophon is explaining why he is dissatisfied with Socrates. He greatly admires the way Socrates exhorts people to virtue, and Socrates' exhortations convinced Clitophon himself that the most important thing for gaining happiness was learning how to obtain virtue, that is, a healthy soul. He produces his own sample Socratic exhortation, and although he puts things a bit sarcastically, there is little reason within the dialogue to doubt that his praise of exhortation and its effects is basically sincere. His sample Socratic exhortation to virtue contains many Socratic tropes, familiar from other dialogues, for instance, that nobody does wrong willingly and that injustice is a kind of disharmony, but the basic point is fairly straightforward. If the soul is what makes you alive, then having a healthy soul is paramount in order to live well and to achieve happiness. But most people ignore the state of their soul and worry about external goods instead, which doesn't make any sense. Clitophon's complaint centers around what happened afterwards. He bought Socrates' message, but then, naturally enough, wanted to learn how to cultivate virtue. Central to Clitophon's discussion are two ideas. The first is the analogy of virtue as a kind of psychic health and harmony to bodily health. The second is the notion of a craft, a sort of knowledge based upon an understanding of the nature of its subject, which then enables you to work for the good of that subject. Clitophon identifies the craft that enables one to bring about virtue with justice. Clitophon's explicit complaint is that Socrates, after getting him hot and bothered for virtue, doesn't deliver the goods. He is either unwilling or unable to teach him what justice is. Most of the rest of the Clitophon is devoted to Clitophon recounting how he went around cross-examining the followers of Socrates, and Socrates himself using Socrates' own techniques and his presuppositions in order to try to discover what justice is. But it turns out that Clitophon comes away empty-handed. Now, it might seem initially that Clitophon is being unfair to Socrates. After all, Socrates never claims to be a teacher of things like what justice is. In fact, he explicitly disavows teaching anyone anything in the Apology, as we talked about in one of our earlier videos on the Apology of Socrates. So what is Clitophon complaining about? We'll look into the question of whether exhorting people to virtue and cross-examining them as Socrates does is a harmful activity. But before doing so, let's talk about some features of Clitophon's own use of the elenchus, features which, I think, implicitly call into question some of the presuppositions Socrates makes in the Socratic dialogues. Clitophon's explicit use of the craft analogy, comparing justice to a techne, is ostensibly used to defeat some of the proposed definitions of justice, or of the product of justice, given by Socrates' associates. However, what Clitophon says about justice as a craft also quite clearly brings out some ways in which this comparison is misleading or problematic. Clitophon says the following things about justice, each of which has an impeccable Socratic pedigree. First, that justice is the virtue or excellence of the soul whereby we live well. Second, that justice is a craft. Third, that crafts have characteristic products, the goal the craft aims at. And fourth, the characteristic product of justice is the virtue of the soul. From these statements, it follows that justice is a craft whose characteristic product is justice, the excellence of the soul. But Clitophon's characterization of crafts would make this result unacceptable. He says that crafts do typically have, as a result, the production of other people skilled in the craft. If one is a doctor, this allows one to teach others how to be doctors as well. But this sort of result cannot be the characteristic product or goal of the craft. Crafts are defined in terms of their products, and to say that medicine is the craft that aims at the production of medicine doesn't inform us what medicine is. Instead, it aims at producing bodily health. So Cleitophon insists on the following fifth principle when asking for the characteristic product of justice. The characteristic product of a craft cannot be the craft itself. These five statements form an inconsistent set, and so Clitophon could have used his statements, assuming that Socrates would have acceded to the fifth statement, as the basis for a standard elenchus of Socrates' own views on justice. And if Socrates were to reject the fifth statement that the characteristic product of a craft cannot be the craft itself, it would be clear that Socrates has some explaining to do, as justice would be a strange craft indeed. A similar sort of worry can be discerned in the refutation of the proposal that the characteristic product of justice is friendship in the cities. Friendship, it is claimed, is a kind of shared knowledge, but this proposal is defeated when it is asked what is meant by friendship. Friendship is a kind of agreement, and it turns out is a kind of shared knowledge, since true friendship must always be beneficial and mere shared belief is not always beneficial. This, however, leads to a circular regress that justice is knowledge, and as a result, its result is agreement, agreement is shared knowledge, and the result of justice as knowledge is knowledge. Clitophon's main complaint is that this turns out to be uninformative. We still haven't specified what this shared knowledge is about, but it can be adapted to also target the Socratic thesis that justice is knowledge of what the good of the soul is. Justice is knowledge of what the good of the soul is. The good of the soul is virtue, and so virtue is knowledge. It follows that justice is knowledge of knowledge, and this obviously still leaves open the question of what the knowledge is of. If we answer that the only sort of knowledge that really matters as far as virtue is concerned is knowledge of what the good of the soul is, the thesis become viciously circular. Moving on, the most serious charge that Clitophon levels against Socrates is that he is a hindrance to the person who is already pursuing virtue. Little that Clitophon says within the dialogue seems to justify directly this harsh charge. It seems that the most he would be entitled to claim is that Socrates is no help at all to those pursuing virtue. Clitophon also says, however, that his frustration with Socrates has led him to go to Thrasymachus, who at least is willing to instruct him. Even though this isn't what Clitophon has in mind when he says it, by driving him to become a follower of a sophist and immoralist like Thrasymachus, Socrates is harming Clitophon in his pursuit of virtue. This, of course, is the opposite of what Socrates takes the result of his exhortation and questioning to be. Socrates exhorts people to worry about the state of their souls and about what the virtues really are. In doing so, he challenges his interlocutors' old conventional assumptions and ways of life, showing them that they do not know what they think they know. When pressed, they are unable to provide a rational justification for their beliefs. Lastly, Clitophon emphasizes on the danger of this procedure, which is that an interlocutor will give up his beliefs and that the elenchus can destroy the old verities while leaving nothing in their place. Now that we have kind of summarized the Clitophon, let us discuss the view of some people that the Clitophon is incomplete. They think that the extant Clitophon is a torso, and the original Clitophon contained a response by Socrates. The main reason for thinking this is similar to the reason for doubting the dialogue's authenticity, which is that Plato wouldn't allow these sorts of charges against his philosophical hero to go unanswered. S.R. Slings, in his edition of the Cleitophon, notes two reasons for doubting that there was a lost response by Socrates. The first is that formally the dialogue doesn't seem unfinished. The end of the text, as we have it, clearly looks back to its beginning. Cleitophon says that he's going to give his reasons for praising Socrates in some respects while criticizing him in others. He goes ahead and does so, and then, after urging Socrates to finally deliver the goods and stop holding back, he recapitulates the main two sections of the speech, but in slightly stronger terms. Secondly, Socrates would be breaking character if he were to defend himself against what Clitophon says. At the beginning of the dialogue, Socrates says that he'll learn from Clitophon what his strong and weak points are. Thus, even if quite ironically, he places himself humbly under Clitophon's guidance, assuming that Clitophon actually knows Socrates' strong and weak points. Socrates never breaks such irony, even in the case of a dialogue like the Euthyphro. He continues until the end of the dialogue, asking for Euthyphro's great wisdom on the subject of piety, because he is sure that such wisdom would help him in his defense and make him a better person. So these were two of the reasons why the Cleitophon is not an unfinished dialogue, and this was it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.